The room is still. Cameras flash, but no one breathes. At the center of the Senate hearing, Justice Clarence Thomas sits, chin high, eyes heavy with the weight of untouchable power. For years, no one dared to question him this way, until now. Representative Jasmine Crockett rises, calm but unyielding, a folder in her hand trembling only from the gravity of what's inside. The murmurs fade. Every reporter senses it. Something irreversible is about to happen. Thomas adjusts his glasses, a subtle move to hide the unease. Crockett's voice cuts through the silence like a blade. Justice isn't silence, sir. It's accountability. A ripple moves through the room. Somewhere a camera zooms in. For a moment his eyes drop just slightly, as if the truth itself had stepped forward. But before she can speak again, he interrupts her. And that was his first mistake. 2 days earlier, the nation had already been boiling. News anchors couldn't stop replaying clips of congressional hearings that felt more like theater than truth. Ethics scandals, hidden trips, billionaire favors. The headlines blurred together like a storm of corruption fatigue. But this one was different. Jasmine Crockett had quietly requested the documents herself, combing through thousands of pages no one thought she'd find. When she walked into that chamber, she wasn't just another representative. She was carrying a nation's disillusionment in her hands. People were tired. Tired of systems built to protect the powerful. Tired of watching men in robes interpret justice for everyone but themselves. On social media, hashtags like #JusticeForAll and #No One Above the Law had begun to trend again, echoing like chants across digital town squares. Even her critics waited, not out of respect but curiosity. In private halls, whispers spread, "She's going after him." Staffers exchanged nervous glances. Networks prepared emergency segments. Clarence Thomas knew what was coming, yet dismissed it. He believed time and legacy made him invincible. But what he underestimated was something far more dangerous than exposure: conviction. Crockett wasn't after spectacle. She was after truth. And truth, once free, doesn't retreat quietly. Somewhere between the murmurs and the marble walls, the feeling grew. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a reckoning. And no one in that chamber, not even the justice himself, knew that the moment she opened that folder, history would flinch. For most of his career, Clarence Thomas wore silence like armor. It was his power move, the stillness that unnerved those around him. When others shouted, he waited. When they pressed, he stared. Decades on the Supreme Court had taught him that endurance could look like strength. And for a long time it worked. He had come from humble beginnings, born in the segregated South, raised by a grandfather who taught him discipline and survival. The boy who once faced poverty had climbed to the nation's highest bench, where few who looked like him had ever stood. That story made him a symbol. But somewhere along the way, that symbol hardened. The man who once challenged injustice became its defender when it served him. He began to move in elite circles quietly. Expensive trips, luxury vacations, whispered dinners with donors who saw him not as a jurist, but as an investment. When the story surfaced, he said nothing. Silence had always protected him before. Why would this time be different? Behind closed doors, colleagues noticed his weariness. The man who once relished intellectual sparring now avoided it. When questions of morality arose, his gaze turned distant, somewhere between pride and guilt. He had convinced himself that legacy was stronger than scandal, that time would bury controversy just as it had before. But this was not the same world he had entered decades ago. The age of quiet deference had ended. Cameras now captured every hesitation, every glance. Truth could trend before breakfast. Still, Thomas carried himself like a monument, immovable, unbothered. To him, this hearing was another test of endurance. The young congresswoman across the room was just noise, and he had weathered noise his entire life. He believed power was about outlasting your critics, not answering them. Yet what he failed to understand was that this time, silence would no longer look like wisdom. It would look like guilt. The world had grown impatient with powerful men pretending not to hear. His aides had warned him that Crockett was relentless, that she didn't grandstand for the cameras, that she did her homework, that she'd already exposed hypocrisy in her own party, but he laughed it off. "Let her talk," he'd said. "She'll run out of air before I run out of patience." The arrogance wasn't in his words, it was in his certainty. He believed the story of Clarence Thomas was already written. A poor black boy who beat the odds, became a justice, and outlasted his enemies. But arrogance has a way of blinding even the wise. Because what he didn't know, what no one in that grand chamber yet realized, was that the same silence he'd once used to protect himself was about to betray him. And as fate would have it, the woman who would expose that truth had just entered the room. Jasmine Crockett's story didn't begin in marble halls or polished chambers. It began in South Dallas, where determination had to be louder than fear. She was the daughter of working-class parents who taught her that justice wasn't a slogan, it was survival. As a young girl, she watched people she loved get mistreated simply because they couldn't afford better representation. That image never left her. It fueled her through law school, through endless nights studying cases others had already written off. When she first stepped into a courtroom as a defense attorney, she was underestimated. Too young, too outspoken, too unapologetically black, but every doubt became a spark. Every sneer from a senior attorney became a challenge. Her voice, once dismissed, began to command rooms, not because it was loud, but because it carried truth. By the time she entered Congress, Jasmine had already been forged by countless battles, defending protesters, facing down corporate lawyers, standing against systems that had long forgotten compassion. But even in Washington, she never adjusted her tone to fit the room. That's what set her apart. She didn't perform for the cameras. She spoke for those who never got to enter the building. There were whispers when she arrived, that she was too raw, too emotional, too direct. But she understood what those words really meant. They meant she didn't play by their rules. She didn't shrink herself to fit their comfort. Her colleagues sometimes warned her to be careful, to wait her turn, to learn how the game works. But Jasmine had never seen justice as a game, and she certainly wasn't waiting. What drew her into this hearing wasn't politics, it was principle. For months, she had watched as scandals around the Supreme Court mounted while the country grew numb. No accountability, no remorse, just silence. The kind that screamed louder than any confession. She remembered her clients back home, people who lost everything for far smaller mistakes. She remembered her parents working 2 jobs, still believing the system could be fair if only the right people stood up. And she thought, if not me, then who? So when the hearing invitation arrived, she didn't hesitate. She read every document, traced every footnote, followed every trail others ignored, not because she wanted headlines, but because she wanted honesty. On the morning of the confrontation, she stood before her mirror and told herself quietly, "This is bigger than you. Speak for them." And that was what gave her calm. Not arrogance, not ego, purpose. When she finally entered that chamber, folder in hand, her steps didn't echo with fear. They carried history, and as she looked across the room at the man who once represented what she fought for but had become what she fought against, she knew exactly why she was there. Her silence was over, and his was about to begin. The air inside the chamber felt different now, heavier, charged with something unspoken. Jasmine Crockett adjusted the microphone and looked directly at Clarence Thomas. Her tone was steady, her presence unwavering. "Justice Thomas," she began, "you've served this nation for over 3 decades. You've shaped laws, influenced generations. But tell me, when did service become privilege?" He blinked slowly, unamused. "Congresswoman, I fail to see the purpose of this line of questioning." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into resolve. "You will." A low murmur rippled through the room. Cameras leaned closer. She asked about undisclosed gifts, lavish trips, the kind that ordinary citizens could never dream of. Each question struck like a chisel against a monument's foundation. He deflected, calmly, condescendingly, with phrases rehearsed in the language of power. "Congresswoman, my conscience is clear," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Maybe it is," she replied, "but the people's faith in this court isn't." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the hum of the lights seemed to pause. His composure began to strain. The faintest twitch crossed his jaw. She glanced at the folder in front of her, fingers brushing its edge, the folder no one had yet seen inside. "You say your conscience is clear," she said quietly. "Let's find out." The room froze. Every camera locked in, and with one deliberate motion, Jasmine Crockett opened the folder. The sound of that folder opening cut sharper than any gavel. Papers whispered against one another as Jasmine Crockett drew the first page out. The tension was unbearable, the kind that makes every blink feel like betrayal. She didn't rush. She let the silence stretch until it became its own kind of testimony. "Justice Thomas," she began, her voice calm but charged, "this is a record of private correspondence between yourself and a well-known political donor, a man who just months later had a case before the court." A rustle spread across the room, aides shifting, cameras refocusing, the collective gasp of disbelief. Thomas stayed still, eyes fixed on the paper in her hand, jaw tightening just enough to betray what words would not. She continued, reading each line with quiet precision. Dates, signatures, coded phrases that now sounded painfully clear. "You wrote, and I quote, 'I owe you more than words can say.'" She paused. "Do you recall this exchange?" His lips parted, but no answer came. He leaned back slightly, the faintest crack in his polished facade. "This nation," she said, lifting her eyes to meet his, "was told you could not be bought. That justice wore no price tag. So but tell me, sir, how does this letter serve justice?" He shifted again, searching for composure. "Congresswoman, you are misrepresenting." She cut in, sharper now, but still steady. "Am I? Or is the truth simply inconvenient today?" The crowd stirred. Reporters exchanged glances that said everything words couldn't. She turned another page. "And here," she continued, "records of luxury travel and flights, hotels, all unreported." The same name appears again. The same signature repeated again and again. Every revelation landed like thunder in a closed room. Thomas tried to speak, but his voice caught. His usual authority, that calm that once intimidated entire committees, began to crumble. You could see the struggle in his eyes, that flicker of realization that this time silence wasn't power. It was confession. Jasmine's tone softened, not mocking, not cruel, just steady, deliberate truth. He once said that integrity is what you do when no one's watching. "But, Justice Thomas, people are watching now." He bowed his head slightly. Just a moment, barely perceptible, but the cameras caught it. The gesture of a man absorbing the weight of his own shadow. The silence after was electric. Somewhere in the back a reporter whispered. He lowered his head. The phrase spread like wildfire. Phones lit up. Tweets began mid-hearing. Crockett closed the folder gently. "This isn't about vengeance," she said quietly. "It's about trust. The people believed in this institution, believed in you. And if that belief dies here today, it's not because of me. It's because of what we all refuse to see." The room stood still. Thomas said nothing. The camera lingered on his face, not in judgment but in truth. And as she gathered her papers, her eyes didn't gloat. They mourned, because she knew this wasn't victory. It was revelation. And beyond those marble walls, the world was already erupting. The air inside the Supreme Court chamber feels electric, charged with something unspoken. The crowd's whispers dissolve into silence as Jasmine Crockett and Justice Clarence Thomas face each other fully now. No legal jargon. No pretense. Just two Americans, one bound by history, the other trying to change it. Jasmine steps forward, her heels clicking like a countdown. Her voice, though calm, carries thunder underneath. "Justice Thomas, do you ever wonder," she begins slowly, "if the laws you defend are just mirrors of old chains polished to look new?" The question slices the room in half. Clarence Thomas tightens his jaw, the courtroom lights glinting off his glasses. He answers quietly but firmly. "Miss Crockett, I defend the Constitution and not emotions. Freedom must have rules or it isn't freedom." Jasmine doesn't flinch. "Rules?" she echoes. "Whose rules? Because for centuries, your Constitution didn't recognize people who looked like me, or you." A ripple runs through the audience. Reporters scribble like mad. Cameras click, but Thomas doesn't respond, and not immediately. He's seen the rage, the righteousness before. Yet something in her tone, something about the way she isn't performing but pleading, it hits deeper than he expects. Jasmine steps closer. Her eyes glisten, not from anger but from memory. "My grandmother marched with blood on her shoes, Justice Thomas, and now I stand here fighting not for attention, but for the same dream she had, to be heard." Thomas exhales slowly. His hand trembles slightly as he removes his glasses. "And what do you want me to do, Congresswoman?" he asks softly. "Listen," she whispers. The moment feels almost sacred. Two generations colliding, not in hate, but in reflection. For the first time in years, Justice Thomas looks down, not in defeat, but in recognition. Though silence deeper than applause fills the chamber. And for that one fragile instant, history seems to bow its head too.